moving, I guess, to another element of our, I guess you could call that immigration stuff, some measure of foreign policy. Uh, Donald Trump has initiated a trade war, which includes Mexico, but also is going after Europe. We have the story this week of a ambassador to Germany who is essentially trying to undermine our relationships with Europe at the expense of promoting conservative political groups, I guess, in Europe, right? I mean, to say this stuff just seems absurd, but that's where we were. I know this is something that you wrote on, and you said that Donald Trump's trade war masks a darker agenda. What is that darker agenda?
Well, I think Trump's trade war with the EU and Canada and Mexico specifically. I mean, there are issues with China. I'm not suggesting that trade wars are ever a good thing, but there's more legitimacy to him confronting China on these issues than there is with Europe and Canada and Mexico, and specifically going against Congress and using the reason that he's using, which is that it's a national security threat. And, he's talking about our allies, our
right.
European allies, NATO, Canada, Mexico. These are people that, we don't traditionally think they're a national security threat. And basically just going up and slapping them in the face and doing these tariffs. And I obviously Trump doesn't really understand trade. I mean, I think we know that by now. Anybody who has even a rudimentary understanding of the way trade works, which is my understanding, is very rudimentary, but nonetheless, it's more sophisticated than his, which is essentially that he thinks that, because there are trade imbalances between one country or another, that means that they should explode every trade deal that exists, and he should be able to, put tariffs on somebody if we're not getting, that we're not selling them as many cars as they're selling us. I mean, that's basically the
right.
kind of thing that he's thinking. That is not how trade works. But nonetheless, no need to go into that. But the fact is that he's doing this for reasons that have more to do with global dominance, in my view, than have anything to do with trade. He said throughout the campaign, and said for many decades, the world is laughing at us. We're going to have to we're going to make them stop laughing at us. We're going to make America great again. When he said that, he was not talking about isolationism. He was saying that somehow or another, we're not getting enough respect. And that's what this is about, is that he's slapping tariffs on. In fact, he was even quoted some months ago saying, I want tariffs. Where are my tariffs? And they were saying, well, here's some intellectual property stuff with China. But I don't want that. Bring me my tariffs. And so, they did. And there was apparently, plenty of arguments within the administration over this, but Trump prevailed because he has, as we've been talking about, he's feeling his oats and he's just issuing edicts now, and they can either run with them or they can quit, I guess, which is what Gary Cohn did. But so that's his motivation, and we'll see at this G7 that's happening, as we speak, how that all falls out. But there are people who see his trade war, his growing antagonism between America's allies and the United States, who see that as an opening. One of which is Russia, of course. They have their own issues with Europe, and some of it is very, very important to both Europe and Russia, especially on energy. So there's openings there if the Russian government can find some ways to divide and conquer between the U.S. and Europe. And then there's this whole, far-right neo-fascist movement that's actually happening in Europe. And it started in Hungary. Now you've got Slovenia. And you've got Americans over there meddling in this stuff. I mean, Steve Bannon's over there. He was in Italy after the election, which was very chaotic. Nobody quite knew, and it's still kind of up in the air what's happening. But there was a strong far-right force there, what he calls populism, and it actually isn't. And then there's, this Austrian prime minister is, they're calling him center-right, but he's really pretty far-right, right, especially on the xenophobic side. And then we sent this Twitter troll, Richard Grinnell, who was, fired from the Romney campaign for his gross social media, was named the ambassador to Germany. And he went over there and immediately started ordering the Germans around, saying, after the Iran deal was nixed, saying, well, you better start, winding up your business with Iran. And everybody's kind of going, hey, this is not what diplomats do, dude. And then he comes out with this interview with Breitbart last weekend in which he's talking about how he's there to promote far-right politicians led by Trump. And that's what he's doing there. And the Germans are freaking out because, this is like not what they need, right?
There's a history of far-right politicians in Germany and it not working out well.
Yeah. And there's a history of, some strange alliances and how that whole thing went down. Not a good history. And, of course, then you've got the Trump administration who are such bozos. Their spokesperson, Heather Nauert, said last week when asked about this dust-up, if you want to call it that, I think it's actually a really important problem, a big problem, and they may have to recall Grinnell, but I don't know if he'll do it. Nauert says, yes, well, we have a long history of cooperation with Germany. There was the Marshall Plan, and just, it was, and D-Day. And everybody's going, D-Day wasn't about cooperation with the Germans. I don't know if you know that. So this is what we're dealing with. And, this is very dangerous stuff. This is what, I was afraid of this from the day after Trump got elected, that he was going to blow up the world order without any concept of how it was going to come down. You and I've talked about that many times, and without any concept of what was going to replace it. And that this volatility, which if you've very wisely pointed out, it's the volatility, not the actual policies, that start to be very dangerous because nobody knows. Now, Trump loves that. He says, I'm unpredictable. Well, you can't have the world's, most powerful superpower be unpredictable. That's the last thing.
Right. Because people,
happen, and that's what's happening.
People want, foreign entities, or all entities, I should say, just want to know that the pieces on the board, as it were, are fairly consistent. That they behave with certain measurable patterns, and that they are somewhat predictable, and that they are reasoned. That there is even an internal sense of logic. And there doesn't really seem to be one with this administration. And it is, it's bizarre what's going on with Grinnell. And it all is very disturbing. I think that there doesn't seem to be a plan. And as far as I can tell, when Donald Trump talks about trade, he's just, for him, it's just not terribly different from some football players taking a knee during the anthem. But we got to take a break. Maybe we'll touch on that in just a moment. We also obviously anticipating next week's North Korean summit. We have stories to talk about the homophobic baker who brought a court case and much more. We'll be right back. I'm Sam Seder. I'm talking to the great Heather Parton. This is Ring of Fire Radio.